Welcome to the Fenton Forecast. I'm your host, David Fenton. My guest today is the chair of the California Energy Commission, David Hochschild, and he has a big job. It's a multi-billion-dollar agency. There's 1,000 employees, and they're responsible for energy in California, including adhering to the law that gets us here to 100% clean, non-polluting energy by 2045. As you'll hear, California is 70% clean energy now, by far the best in the nation. It's not well known, but we have more electric vehicle charging stations in California now than gas station outlets. Imagine. That's how much progress we're making on truly clean energy. Of course, the oily, slimy, corrupt Trump administration and their oil, coal, and gas overlords are trying to stop us. And as you'll hear, California has many lawsuits against the administration to try to stop their interference with making energy cheaper and cleaner for everybody. So over to my interview with David Hochschild, chair of the California Energy Commission. I think you'll be very inspired by what you're about to hear. Welcome to the Fenton Forecast. My guest today is the chair of the California Energy Commission, David Hochschild. David, welcome.
Good to be here.
Coming on the show today. You're a busy guy. So, David, tell people what you do.
Well, the Energy Commission is California's primary energy policy and planning agency. We sort of have a fruit cup of different responsibilities. We set the energy code for new construction. So we've mandated solar on all new homes, all new buildings. We rank number one in the United States on energy efficiency, in large part because of these energy efficiency codes. And that includes appliances like televisions and computers. And
Saving people money.
Saving people a lot of money. Over $200 billion energy savings since we started doing codes. We also operate what I believe is the best clean energy research and development program in the world, which is the EPIC program, where we invest in cutting edge new innovation, battery technology, solar, wind, electric vehicles, EV charging, all that stuff. And then we run the SB 100 program to get us to 100% clean energy.
Tell us about SB 100 in California. What is that?
So SB 100 is the law that California passed in 2018. It requires that California get to 100% clean electricity by 2045. We're almost 70% clean electricity today, but there's a lot of enforcement. We have 43 different publicly owned utilities that we oversee that are all in compliance, and there's a couple investor-owned utilities as well. So anyways, we coordinate with our sister agencies, the Public Utilities Commission and the Air Resources Board, on that. And then we handle issues like grid reliability and managing high gasoline prices. We have a whole team working just on that and those kind of emergencies. And then we run a bunch of other programs. So we're doing EV charging across the state, spending over $100 million a year. That's a lot of money. We now have more EV charge plugs than we have gasoline nozzles.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's quite an accomplishment. I don't think people know that.
Yep. 216,000 electric vehicle charge plugs and about 120,000 gasoline nozzles. So we're putting out money into that. We're putting money into long duration energy storage.
Meaning batteries?
Yeah, not just normal batteries, but batteries. So a typical, lithium ion battery will be about a 4-hour dispatch. We're doing, in addition to that, batteries that have up to a 100-hour dispatch, different chemistries. So we're investing in that.
So these are utility scale, so they can run the grid when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing.
Correct. So a huge focus on that, and then improving energy density and safety. We run programs around tribes. We put $165 million into tribal energy sovereignty projects, mostly solar batteries, microgrids, but also heat pumps and EV charging and the like. So anyway, we run a wide variety of programs, really all aimed at getting us to 100% clean energy future.
And do you think we're going to do that?
We are going to do it. That is what's exciting. We're getting there. And really, starting with the grid, I think an important point to remember is that alternative energy is the wrong word to use to describe renewables in California today. Fossil fuels alternative. We're more than 2/3 of our electricity coming from clean sources and increasing every day. And the scale we're getting to is extraordinary. We're now building the largest battery storage project in the world in West Fresno County. Darden is the name of that project, $5.5 billion, and many more projects like it on the way. And so this means you can run the grid on sunshine at night, and you can run the grid on wind when it's not windy because you're able to capture that electricity. So the real game now is extending the reach of this clean electricity into all of these other sectors that for decades have been powered by fossil fuels. So, most notably transportation. We got 2.5 million electric vehicles on the road today. We're adding about 1,200.
Out of how many?
Out of, we're probably 30 million cars, something.
Making a dent, but we got a long way to go.
Long way to go, but we're adding 1,200 EVs a day, and we're about a quarter of vehicle sales.
1/4 of electric vehicle sales in California are electric. Does that include hybrids?
That includes anything that can be plugged in. So plug-in hybrid counts, all electric vehicle counts. A hybrid that you don't plug in does not count.
Sure.
But I think the point is that there's a lot of momentum in that space. And then in other spaces you wouldn't think of. I mean, city of Oakland became the first city in the US to fully electrify its school bus fleet. 74 buses, 74 chargers. There's projects like that underway. Class 4, 5, and 6 trucks. The UPS, Amazon.
Big trucks or
no, that's mid-size. Like Amazon.
Yeah, I see
FedEx.
the Amazon trucks here are electric.
Yeah, so they're electrifying. FedEx is going to get to 100% electric by 2030, and California company, Harbinger, that it's building those electric truck chassis. We have in new construction, big move towards electrification. A decade ago, only 1% of new construction was done all electric, mostly being built, with gas heating. Now it's over 80% all electric.
80% of new construction. Is that homes or offices?
That's homes for new homes. Yeah, we've built about 120,000.
So the homes are not using fossil fuels. They're not raising sea levels. They're not making wildfires worse. They're not heating the planet. People don't think about homes that way, but when they're powered by fossil fuels, that's what they do.
That's right. And so these are homes coming with induction electric cooktops, heat pump water heaters, heat pumps for space heating, and so on. And then other sectors. I just came back from the electric semi-truck factory that Tesla has built in Nevada. Okay. $3.7 billion factory. It opens in July. They're going to make 1,000 electric semi-trucks a week, 500-mile range. They recharge in 35 minutes. And one thing about electric trucks is the way the drivetrain works, they don't have to slow down going up a steep grade. So a fully loaded semi-truck can pass a car, going uphill because of the power of the electric motor.
And there's no gears, right?
Right. And of course, much lower cost to operate, and they're going to be making, 1,000 a week at that facility. And I think you're going to see transition in all these spaces that, people would think, oh, that's going to be very, very slow to electrify. Even aviation, Joby and Archer and other companies, that's a $6 billion industry in California, electric aviation. And we're here in San Francisco Bay. We're building the first fleet of battery electric ferries, 5 vessels under construction. So a lot of...
But they have some of those in Washington State, right?
They're being made in Washington State. I think this will be the first full fleet of 5 vessels altogether.
Right. In the case of electric trucks, so that means you won't be breathing all that horrible diesel exhaust when you're behind them.
That's true. And then there's another feature too that I think is worth highlighting, which is, so I had a chance, I've driven one of those trucks. I've spoken to some of the drivers, mostly the trucks that we have that are all electric in California, have been operating out of the Modesto Pepsi facility. I had a chance to talk to one of the drivers who'd been driving a semi-truck for 30 years in California. His last year was his first driving all electric. And he said, unquestionably, he knows it's good for his health. The reduction in noise and vibration at the end of his shift, he just experienced less fatigue.
And also these bus depots are often in poor neighborhoods. They contribute to asthma in those neighborhoods.
Right.
So electrifying the trucks is a very big deal.
Yeah.
And they're quieter.
And I think, all these things, I think there's a really elegant and beautiful alignment between what's good for climate and clean energy and what's good for health. And I will just tell you, been to Norway a couple times for some delegations the last few years. So most electrified country in the world, 98% of new vehicle sales in Norway are electric.
Isn't that amazing?
They have 82 of these fully battery electric ferries. They got electric construction equipment, electric cranes, electric dump trucks. And so when you walk around downtown Oslo, one of the things you notice is because all the cars are electric, it's quiet. Riding the ferries, it's quiet. And there is a certain calm and feeling of health you have just from the noise reduction, being in an urban environment that's so electrified. So that's the future, and that's where we're going to get as a state. And I think that's where.
But think of the scale. Norway is what, 3 million, 4 million people?
4 million people, yeah.
California is what, 40 million, right?
That's right.
And California is the fourth largest economy in the world. So you really think you're going to be able to do that at this scale here?
Of course,
I think
because
that would surprise people who think this is niche stuff.
all of these criticisms people said, 10 years ago about renewables, okay, when it was called a pipe dream that we'd ever get more than, 10% of our electricity from renewables. Now that we're 70%, okay, and by the way, that's happening at the same time our economy is growing, because, when we started down this path aggressively 15 years ago on cleaning up the grid, we were the 10th biggest economy in the world. Since then, we have passed Russia and Brazil and Italy and France and UK and now Japan, and now we're the fourth largest economy in the world. So we do have this muscle as a state. We know how to grow industries, and there is a big transfer of talent from high tech into clean tech. So I'm very optimistic because cost reductions on our side.
Means keep it, as you buy more, it gets less.
Absolutely, yes. And then, a typical lithium-ion battery is improving about 3% a year on energy density, which is why your range keeps getting longer for the new vehicles. And so
for the same weight.
Yeah, all and the same size. So all of these factors, add in. And then, you have glimpses of, what is possible. China, of course, has now surpassed us.
Most people don't know about that.
So, people don't realize China this year is at 60% of new vehicle sales being electric. I had a friend of mine who was at the Shanghai Auto Show. So one of the largest auto shows in the world. And China is, of course, the largest auto market in the world.
Right.
And he was walking the floor and telling me, these cars, it's like 90% electric, on the floor. So this is what's coming. And you have these heavyweight companies, BYD and CATL, who have now made technology milestones that are totally game-changing. For example, CATL came out with a charging technology that does 323 miles of charge in 5 minutes.
Wow.
So if you think about that, that is really no different than your experience going to a gas station. And so
if you're not breathing in all those benzene fumes.
But for a long time, that was one of the barriers to adoption for electric vehicles. Long charge time.
A lot of people still think it's a problem.
Yeah. So we're going to get there. Fast charging is happening. Longer range is happening. Accessible charging is happening. A lot of kinks to work through. And certainly, what Trump is doing can slow things, but I don't think he can put the genie back in the bottle.
Well, let's talk about Trump in a minute. So take the issue of lithium. As you know, there are people who say that digging for the lithium for batteries is just as bad as digging for fossil fuels. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so lithium's quite, well, it's found all over the world, but the places where it's produced primarily is just 4 countries. So it's Chile and Argentina, where it's in these large evaporation ponds, and then it's China and Australia, where it's hard rock mining. We are very fortunate in California to have a massive lithium reserve in an area near the Salton Sea.
That's near the border with Mexico.
Correct. And there's enough lithium there to power 400 million electric vehicles.
Wow.
More than one for every American. And interestingly, it's the most low impact way to produce lithium in the world because it's in a superheated geothermal brine that is now cycled to run geothermal power plants. So like a process you attach to it and withdraws the lithium, and then the brine gets recharged into the reservoir. So it's got a very small footprint. So if you're doing 20,000 tons of lithium from South America in the evaporation ponds, you typically impact like 30,000 acres. When you do it from hard rock mining in Australia and China, about 3,000 acres. And from Salton Sea, about 30 acres. Very small footprint.
That's amazing. You've called this the Saudi Arabia of lithium here in California.
Yeah, it is. It's an incredible reserve. But just generally speaking, I mean, the impact of fossil fuel production is much worse. Obviously coal mines, the work is really dangerous and has big health impacts. And then you have these, leaks and, we've seen what's happened with BP, Horizon, all these things. So lithium is more sustainable, but I want to be clear. I mean, there are impacts to every form of energy generation, including renewables, but this is much, much less.
And then also the misrepresentation, you see this online, that the amount of drilling for batteries and solar panels is the same as drilling for fossil fuels, and it's just propaganda put out by vested, dirty industries. I mean, if you look, the amount of drilling we do for fossil fuels is way up here on a graph. And if you look at the amount of drilling and mining we do for batteries and solar panels, it's way down here. And yet they misrepresent this on purpose to confuse everybody. Don't be fooled.
Well, of course, the take-home point is when you are putting lithium into a battery that's running your electric vehicle, then that is running on solar and wind primarily, and you're not needing to
keep drilling
oil and keep drilling. So having batteries, having lithium makes you more energy independent.
Plus, you don't have to keep buying fuel for it. I mean, we're in a house right here now that's 100% powered by the sun and batteries. Our electric bill is literally zero. We put out no pollution. Not only is our electric bill zero, but we have guaranteed permanent price protection because, the sun can never go up in price. The wind can never go up in price. PG&E, our utility, keeps raising prices, but here the price stays the same. You can't say that your electric utility bill isn't going to go up in price. So, David, you're very optimistic, it sounds like.
I think there's a lot of cause for optimism. I feel like I am an optimist, but I'm an optimist because I have reasons to be optimistic. Part of the wonderful thing about this role, I am traveling all the time. I'm meeting with entrepreneurs and innovators who are driving these new technologies mainstream on everything from direct air carbon capture to long-range electric vehicles and next generation solar. Last week, we just did a dedication at a company in Fremont with former Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, Tandem PV, which has achieved a 30% conversion efficiency.
PV is full of it there. That's the efficiency of the solar.
The amount of sunlight it converts to electricity.
So you're talking to a lay audience.
So, but when you and I met, the conversion efficiency, this is back in 2000, was probably, 10 or 12%. So now to get to that is extraordinary. And what that means is you need then much less land and many fewer solar panels to generate the same amount of power.
Right.
Yeah. And so we have the advantage of having innovation on our side. And a lot of what I feel is going on right now with the Trump administration really is a war on innovation and in every way trying to stop the
progress. On science.
Yeah, but I think we're fortunate enough to be in a state that has conviction about these industries and the solutions that are possible. So we're still moving forward in California. That feels really good.
Yeah, for sure. Tell us about wind. As I understand it, the sea off California is quite deep compared to the East Coast. So wind is more difficult here. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we have 583 square miles that have been leased, 5 different leases for offshore wind development. The East Coast of the United States is all shallow water. Mm-hmm. And so all of those projects that are now in construction, Trump did a whole bunch of stop work orders, 5 different stop work orders for the offshore wind project. They've all been defeated in court. They're all back in construction. They're going to get done. Our projects are going to be deeper water. So the way that works is it's a metal tripod that's floating and it's tethered to the seafloor with high tension cables. I visited a number of these projects in Norway and Scotland and Portugal, massive projects. So the one rotation of the turbine powers a house for a day, right? So that's
one rotation.
Yes. So just an extraordinary amount of power that these things are producing. So I absolutely believe the technology is there and ready to do it. It's really a matter of us being able to build it. And this is, what's been so challenging with the Trump administration. But offshore wind,
they're trying to stop it.
Correct. Here's the interesting stat. Just if you're to do the fixed bottom turbines that are just going into shallow waters and deploy those everywhere around the world where it's possible to do so, that alone would meet 100% of today's electricity needs. If you do floating, there's more than 10 times the capacity. So it's an incredible resource. It complements solar very well,
right? Because
it's actually generating power times the day when
the sun is not as strong.
Correct.
The wind blows when the sun isn't, and vice versa, often.
Yeah, they're very.
And when you add batteries and other forms of storage, you have basically the sun always shining and the wind always blowing in a battery. This is modern energy And these people need to come up to date who said, oh, well, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. Time to join the modern world, folks. Plus, the grid managers have learned how to adapt to this variability, which is very predictable. I mean, the propaganda, as usual, as Bob Dylan said, all is phony. Yeah. So, are you going to get wind offshore in California? Or
I believe we will. Yeah,
we don't have it yet.
No, we don't have it yet. There's one project, a smaller scale project in state waters that's moving forward in the short term called Catamo. And then there is this much, much larger project to get to 25 gigawatts. But that is going to have to wait until we have a sympathetic administration in office. In the meantime, though, the voters of California have given us $475 million to deploy for ports. So there's port grants going to do port upgrades.
Meaning to get ready for the wind.
Yeah, there's a lot of upgrades for ports that will be needed. And I think there's a lot of interest from, labor and others who want to see new industries created here in California.
And not let China own them all.
Yeah, correct. But the other point I was going to make is, in addition to batteries, the other thing that's helping support reliability and decarbonize the grid is the movement towards a regional grid, which is now
Tell us about that.
Underway. So that was a piece of legislation the governor signed last September, and it really aligns all the Western states into a regional market. And you want a grid that is larger than the weather, right? So that if you're having it's raining one place, there'll be another place where it's windy or sunny, and you can move power around. Much more efficient to do that. And actually, it helps us decarbonize faster in a regional grid because those last remaining coal plants can't compete against zero marginal cost renewables.
They come in from somewhere else.
Correct. Yeah, because there's no fuel costs for once you've built the solar and wind, you want to maximize that and help that power move to wherever it's needed. So a regional grid is
so it's much cheaper for people.
It is, yeah. And that's something we really need. Electricity prices have been going up. What is the primary driver of that? Climate.
Yeah.
Wildfire is the number one driver.
People.
Yeah, the number one driver of the increase in electricity prices is wildfire in California. Yeah. And so
because of the need to bury the lines?
Yeah, and vegetation management and a whole bunch of other costs that have been borne by ratepayers. So Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory did a wonderful study on this just recently and unpacked why rates have gone up, because they basically were very stable from 2000 to about 2018. And what happened in that time frame? We had the worst wildfires in the state's history, and it's colossally expensive. And so that, is part of this challenge of climate change does make it harder to fight climate change, because then when electricity is really expensive, that, is harder, reduces the value proposition of getting electric.
And there's no question these fires are getting stronger. It's pretty simple. We're trapping more heat on Earth with fossil fuel pollution, so it's getting hotter and it causes more fires and it dries out the soil. There are people trying to keep us from understanding this, and we have to stop them. This is really the battle of our lifetimes, isn't it, David?
It is indeed. But it's good to be in the fight together and to understand the role that states play here. Unlike Europe, states in the U.S. have great power, most of the power actually, to drive the energy transition. We set the renewable energy percentage for power on the grid. We do permitting. We do tax credits. We do research and development. We do interconnection standards and all of these things that collectively drive the clean energy future, which is why the grid continues to get cleaner around the U.S. Even in the first year of the Trump administration, by the way, 2025, 91% of the new capacity additions on the U.S. electric grid were clean energy in Trump's first year.
Sure.
Because states are still deploying a lot of, solar.
Because the market momentum is being driven by pricing.
That's right.
And he's trying to slow it down. Let's talk about that for a minute. You've been involved in many battles with the Trump administration. Tell us about that.
Well, I think in Trump 1.0 from 2016 to 2020, I think the state of California filed something in the neighborhood of 120 lawsuits during that 4-year period. Now, I think in the first, whatever it's been, year and 4 months, I think we're at something like 70 lawsuits already.
And this is around energy or others?
This is on everything, but including energy. I mean, many of the things they've done unlawfully coming in and canceling grants that were already awarded. Right? These things are They're unlawful, but they're also unprecedented. And so they need to be contested vigorously in court, if we're to have a functioning democracy. So we're lucky to have an Attorney General, Rob Bonta, who's really, really tremendous and committed to that. So my agency, the Energy Commission, just issued an investigatory subpoena this week related to this lease buyback, where one of the 5 offshore wind leaseholders had struck a deal with the Trump administration to withdraw their lease. And
Offshore wind.
correct.
Is that in California or
That's
elsewhere?
off the coast of California, central coast of California.
Right. Which company was that? I read
Ocean
that.
Winds. Yeah.
Ocean Winds.
Yeah.
This is like, for example, on the east, aren't they trying to give the French energy company Total $1 billion to not build a wind farm?
Yeah. What they're trying to do is have
It's a bribe, basically.
Yeah, basically pay the money that these companies use to buy the lease, and then get the companies to commit to do fossil fuel infrastructure in the Gulf Coast. Yeah, that's the play.
More expensive energy, in other words.
Yeah, it's such an absurd thing to do at this time, because with the Iran war, it has highlighted how deeply vulnerable we are to the volatility in fossil fuel markets. Everybody is experiencing this pain of these higher prices. And that's the benefit of renewables, is we reduce our vulnerability to precisely these kind of price increases.
Homegrown and home-bred.
It seems such an odd time to be trying to make us more dependent on fossil than we need to be.
But to take $1 billion and use it as a bribe instead of to build clean wind energy is outrageous. So, David, why do you think this is happening?
Well, at one level, it's not very complicated. I think the fossil fuel industry contributed $500 million to Trump's election. And, a lot of what I've observed with how the Trump administration is operating is just very, very transactional. Look who's getting pardons and who's contributed and so on. So consideration is really granted to entities that contribute in some fashion to his family businesses and to his election. On another level, I think he sees the fossil fuel industry somehow as his constituency. And, it's interesting. You take coal, for example. He ran in 2016 on a coal agenda.
Right.
But there too, more coal got retired under Trump than under Obama.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
because it's too expensive.
Yeah. And the number of coal miner jobs in the US, is less than 30,000 people. We have 350,000 people in solar and wind.
You hear that, folks? 350,000 jobs in wind and solar, only 30,000 in coal. That's the future.
Yeah. So there's a way in which the psychology of this has not caught up with the market realities.
It's kind of like living in the 1950s. It's like his Kennedy Center Awards. He only gives it to people from the 1950s.
Yeah. The sad thing is that, China is not living in the 1950s. And so we're going to get our lunch eaten, if we don't get back in the game on clean energy. And I have to say, when I look at China today, a lot of what I feel is kind of jealousy. Like, they're actually going big. China's the largest manufacturer and the largest market for wind, for offshore wind, for solar, for batteries, for electric vehicles.
And it's so ironic because of the disinformation talking points. What about China? Well, it's true. China's the biggest polluter as a nation, but we're the biggest polluter per person. And China is investing in enormous amounts of clean energy, and we're not. So instead of asking, what about China? I think we should ask, what about us?
Yeah. No, and look at what they've done. In March, I just got this data today, they produced 68 gigawatts of solar. Okay, this is what they manufactured, which doubled from the previous month. And that is more than the entire grid capacity of California.
Right.
Okay, in 1 month that they shipped.
It's the equivalent of 68 nuclear power plants operating at peak capacity.
Extraordinary. And so their scale.
And that doesn't count the wind. And of course, the other thing people don't realize is that when you use electrified transportation, you need less energy. And most electric technologies, you need less energy. You don't lose as much energy. I think the figure on a gasoline car is something like 30% of the energy moves the car.
Yeah.
With an electric car, it's almost all the energy. I was just in Vietnam and we rode around in Chinese BYD cars.
Wow, how was it?
They were amazing. They were quiet. They had great suspension and great technology, and they only cost $10,000. We need to help our companies catch up. By the way, I have a Tesla and put a sticker on it. It says vintage Tesla, pre-madness edition. It's sad that Elon has lost half his mind, but he still does make great electric vehicles. Right? I'm glad he's making trucks too. That's really great. So how else is the administration trying to interfere with clean energy in California? You talked about wind. Are there other ways?
I think generally a good way to understand the Trump administration in 2026 is like, it's really a version of like political COVID. Okay. It came in, hit everybody in the mouth, and a really, really widespread, severe impacts. Okay. Everything from the tariffs, by the way, even if you support some tariff regime, this way of operating is absurd. We've changed tariff rates over 50 times since he took office.
Right.
There's no predictability. So that's impacting everybody. So we're trying to
No predictability means people can't invest because they don't know what it's going to be.
Yeah, you want to build a factory in the US, you have nothing to plan around because there's so much uncertainty and volatility. So, but that's raised costs. So, if you're trying to build a battery project or a battery factory here, that's hurt. Obviously, this move that they announced this week of freezing all of the active wind projects on land, with about 150 projects under construction that require sign off from the Department of Defense, that's been halted. It's absurd. At the same time, they're saying, we have an energy emergency and we got to build all. Well, they're actually stopping energy projects that are,
and they say it's in the name of national security, but of course, this is true. Yeah, you're more secure if you're making your own clean energy.
No, and all these offshore wind stop work orders that they did in the East Coast, they all had signed mitigation agreements with the Department of Defense. Department of Defense had signed off on those lease areas before they were developed. So it's a very,
it's all lies.
It's a very political thing they're doing. But, I would say it's hurting us in other ways. The Trump administration generally, I just returned from Europe. I was there with my daughter. Our reputation is in tatters as a country. And so people wanting to come to the United States to host a conference, people are overflying from Canada now, overflying the US and going to Mexico deliberately because they don't like the Trump administration. And so that's hurting the economy. So I think there's been just impacts across the whole society and the whole economy, but we have to weather the storm. And I think COVID's the right analogy because, it did make it through that. We will pass.
Yeah, of course.
We're 6 months away from a very consequential election that I think will telegraph the future of the country.
Yeah, I think so for sure. The thing about authoritarian regimes is they never last because no one will tell the leader the truth. And if you don't know the truth, it's hard to make good decisions. People don't talk about this, but Trump's longest lasting legacy will be the excess amount of carbon dioxide pollution in the atmosphere, which will stay up there, making temperatures hotter literally for centuries. That's his true legacy. And it's such a tragedy. But luckily, you talked about carbon removal. What's happening with that?
Well, direct air carbon capture is a really interesting sector.
And explain what that is.
That is a sector where essentially what they're developing technologies that can suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and sequester it. And so,
or turn it into products.
So, I visited the Climeworks project in Iceland, which is basically has these devices that look like an air conditioner. Essentially, they suck CO2 out and they pump it into these rock formations that basically convert it into an inert rock, essentially. You have other companies. There's actually a brewery here in Alameda that
using CO2 from the air.
So there's a whole bunch of different approaches to this. We're funding a bunch of different strategies around carbon capture. My view is that even if we get to 100% clean electricity, which I believe we will, we're still going to need to do. There's so much carbon pollution in the atmosphere. We have to devise ways to withdraw it.
There are people in the climate movement who are concerned that carbon capture is a free pass to keep polluting for fossil fuel companies. I don't view it that way. There's way too much carbon in the atmosphere. We're going to have to take some of it down, or the seas are going to keep rising and the temperatures are going to keep going up.
They will. And again, California's role is phenomenal here. I think about half of the companies in this sector of direct air carbon capture are here in California. And so we're really pleased to help incubate that and to scale it. And so, a lot of the seed planting for the solutions that we need as a nation is happening right here. That's part of our job, is to be the garden bed for that stuff.
Oh, great. Okay. So, David, tell us a little bit about you. What's your background and how did you get into this?
I had no earthly idea what I was doing with my life after college. I bounced around, worked construction for a bit, did various internships, and then I ended up accompanying my father, who's a journalist, to South Africa. He had gotten a commission to do a story on Nelson Mandela, who had just been released from prison and was campaigning for president. He asked me, "Hey, do you want to come with me?" And I said, "Hell yes."
Nice.
And that was one of the coolest experiences of my life. And I decided I wanted to go back and work there. And I did. And I ended up working for President Mandela's youth program in a township, living and working in this township in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. And one of the first things that Mandela did when he was president was he provided postal service to the townships. There hadn't been an easy way for people to send letters.
The townships meaning the slums.
Yeah, so these are typically the black townships outside, predominantly white cities. So I was in a township sorry.
It's okay, let's back up. So you were in a township.
So I was in a township of about 30,000 people in the Eastern Cape, a little town called Port Alfred. And there was the ANC government had put in this postal station with solar on top and batteries and lighting. And so it was this quite remarkable thing where there was light at night in an area where there wasn't a lot of power, and people could actually, send mail to one another. And I remember just something about how elegant and simple that was, that what solar enabled. I really remember getting excited about the potential, because you can't put a coal-fired power plant on a rooftop, right? And, the potential to scale solar. And so I got quite excited about that. And then went to grad school, and I ended up going to work for Willie Brown when he was mayor of San Francisco.
But your grad school wasn't in engineering or physics, right?
No, I had a public policy. I went to the Kennedy School of Government.
Oh.
Willie Brown actually came and gave a talk there, and I went back to work for him. And then we had power outages in 2001 in San Francisco. Lights went out every day. Schools were going dark. Banks, grocery stores repeatedly. We did not know what was going on. Actually, nobody seemed to know. Later, it turned out it's market manipulation from companies like Enron,
right?
Jack up the prices. And the Chinese word for crisis is wei ji. It's just two other words put together: danger and opportunity. There's always opportunity inside a crisis, and so inside that crisis, a bunch of us got together to decide to run a $100 million ballot initiative to put solar panels on public buildings in San Francisco in 2001. So Randy Hayes, who had founded Rainforest Action Network, and Mark Leno was on the board of supervisors, and Adam Browning and a few others. And we ran this as a ballot initiative, and it passed by 73% in November of 2001. And we got solar on the roof of the Moscone Center, the airport, City Hall.
And was this the founding of Vote Solar?
Yeah. And so Vote Solar was an organization I co-founded with my friend Adam Browning. Nonprofit, which is still going today, working in about 25 states on pro-solar policies. And so that was really born out of that campaign. And there's really, because there's a very specific suite of policy needs that solar had: interconnection standards and rate design and tax credits and all of these other very, very specific problem solving that needed to be done, that we decided to focus on that, because the promise of solar was so great. Because every time global demand for solar doubles, the price goes down by 20%.
Right.
And so at that time,
which is still happening.
It's still happening.
Right.
And so at that time, solar was the single most expensive resource on the power market. Today, it's the single cheapest. Solar panel back in 2001 cost $5 a watt. Today, it's like 15 cents a watt. Right. And we're not done with cost reduction.
Yeah.
There's a lot more cost reduction.
It's like for people, if you're old enough to remember when DVD players and cell phones and computers first came out, they were incredibly expensive. And then they dropped to the point where prices are very cheap. And the same is happening to solar, and it happens in all electronics manufacturing.
It's true. And when you kind of unpack it, it's really three things. It's innovation, automation, and scale. And all of those are happening, but it's largely scale.
Yeah.
And so that's what's driven costs down. And so we're on a path right now for solar to provide the majority of the world's electricity. Okay. And already today, it is annually, it's the single biggest investment every year
In
on
new energy.
and the grid. And
Right.
yeah. So here's a really good stat. So in 2004, it took a year to construct 1 gigawatt of solar. That's enough to power a city like San Francisco. In 2010, it took a month globally to construct a gigawatt of solar. In 2016, it took a week. In 2023, it took a day. 2024, half a day. And now it's over $500 billion a year
Right.
going into solar. So that's kind of the poster child for what's possible with clean energy writ large. But all these other things like wind and batteries, electric vehicles, and heat pumps are following similar trajectories. So that's why I'm optimistic.
Yeah. So you founded Vote Solar, and now you're running a very large agency. What's the budget for your agency?
We're doing about $8 billion over 3 years. We got about 1,000 people at the Energy Commission.
So how did you get from being the nonprofit activist to being the chair of the Energy?
Yeah, I went from Vote Solar, did that for 4 years, and I got recruited to run a trade association of the solar manufacturers to continue to work on policy. So I did that for a couple of years. And then I went to Silicon Valley and worked in solar manufacturing for a company called Solaria. And so I was in the middle of negotiating a really complex deal on net metering for rooftop solar. And I was working with Governor Jerry Brown on that. And there was an opening at the Energy Commission. So he appointed me to be one of the 5 commissioners. And then Gavin Newsom, I had known and worked with quite closely when he was mayor of San Francisco. I wrote his energy plan and been partnering with him for years. So when he became governor, he named me chair of the Energy Commission in 2019. So I've been in that role about 7 years.
And how long do you serve?
They're 5-year terms, and it's appointed by the governor and then conferred by the Senate. So I got another 2.5 years on this term.
And this governor is termed out at the end of the year. So what happens to you?
Yeah, the Energy Commission terms, are set, and they continue even in the new administration. But a new governor could pick a different one of the 5 commissioners to be
the commissioner.
chair. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm just going into, I'm trying to run through the finish line, get everything done that I'm passionate about, and then we'll see where the chips land. But there's some really cool stuff that I still feel the fire in the belly.
I can see that.
Even after doing
Can you see that, folks?
Just for example, we just put out this proposed tire efficiency standard. So this is basically a standard that would require higher silica content in tires to ensure that we're only having really efficient tires on the market.
Meaning that you get more mileage out of that?
You get longer range.
It also reduce the amount of that the tires disintegrate?
No difference on that. It saves $1 billion a year, and you extend the range both of electric vehicles and conventional vehicles. So you're getting fuel and electricity savings from this. And it's the kind of thing, this is, people talk about what is the role of government? I mean, this is a great role because all of these high efficiency tires are standard with new vehicles. So when you buy a new car, and that's very important for people selling cars, they want to highlight the range and all this stuff, right? But when you buy replacement tires, there's no rule requiring the high efficiency tires. So there's some very low quality tires on the market that end up costing you a lot more. And so
over the lifetime of the tire.
Yeah.
And what about up front?
Oh, it's only like $6.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
there's like building standards. If the government doesn't make the rules, there's no rules.
No, it pays for itself in a matter of months. And this is a really big win for consumers. So that's why Consumer Federation of America, Consumer Federation of California, Consumer Reports are all in support of this. But this is the kind of thing that I love, and it keeps me going at the Energy Commission. And a number of other big standards we've done. The lighting standard, when we did that and moving the state from incandescents to LEDs, well, that saves $6.7 billion a year in lighting costs.
Right.
Reduced lighting electricity use 80%. That's a big number, and that's a function of having a standard that requires high color rendition, high quality LEDs, and we've moved the market
of those ugly all white things.
Right, exactly. So that's the thing with this role in California, because we have 40 million people in this state, and we are the 4th largest economy in the world. When we establish these things, it's such a big market that a lot of manufacturers, whether you're manufacturing a light bulb or what have you, they don't want to run one line just for the California market,
Right.
for the rest of North America.
So it forces innovation around the country and the world.
It does. And here's an example. So we did computer efficiency a while ago, and the computer industry said,
Computer energy efficiency.
Energy efficiency. Yeah. And they said, oh, no, we can't build a computer as efficient as you're saying. So it was one of my favorite Energy Commission stories. My advisor, Ken Ryder, who's an electrical engineer and was leading that, he bought like 4 different computers, took the most efficient components from each of them, and then built his own computer with all the efficient parts and said, yes, you can. Here's how it works. And so that's our standard. And so then we've done that. And then the interesting thing is there's, a lot of times there's a lot of sound and fury. And then once it's done, nobody looks back. And
right.
So we did
people don't realize companies can be bureaucratic too.
Oh, yeah.
Not just government.
Oh, it's true. And things like televisions. We did a TV energy efficiency standard that cut the energy use in half of TVs and saves $1 billion a year. So those kind of things are very meaningful. And it's all part of the reason why we are ranked number 1 in energy efficiency. I mean, the ability to have.
Well, that goes back to Jerry Brown. I mean, did Amory Levins work with Jerry on those energy efficiency standards?
Oh, I think so. Back in the day, yeah.
I had Amory on recently. He's always such a font of optimism.
He is. And Jerry Brown, too, is still going strong. I still keep in close touch with him.
Yeah. So, David, energy and gas prices are very expensive here, and you mentioned that your commission is responsible for looking into that. Why are they so expensive here? It must be very frustrating to you.
Well, right now, the Iran war is the primary driver of the spike that we've seen. We've gone from $4.60 to $4.60 to about $6.
Yeah,
and we're not done. By the way, I mean, things do not appear to be stable in the Persian Gulf right now. So
because of the global energy price of oil.
Yeah, and this dynamic with Iran. I mean, I think Trump really stepped in it here. I mean, I think it's unclear how long we're going to be dealing with this situation. So, but we have some other constraints as well in California, and I think one of the tricky pieces of the energy transition is that you have to ensure adequate supply of gasoline, to the market at affordable prices, in conditions where, gasoline consumption in California is going down about 1% a year, and EV consumption has been going up, and that's a good trend. We are seeing that globally, but the trick becomes, for the refiners, they have this balancing act of, if you're in a state with a declining market and, you have a refinery fire and you need to make repairs, how much are the sunk costs and so on. Reality is we're going to be operating refineries for a while in California. So there's still, a market for gasoline as we move forward. But the goal is to have a steady and predictable transition where we don't actually see these kind of wild price fluctuations with gasoline. We try to, protect consumers from that. And so that's required a lot of work.
That's part of your job.
And that is really the purview of my wonderful friend and colleague, Vice Chair Siva Gunda, who's been leading the Energy Commission's efforts on that and going out and, visiting all the refineries and engaging heavily on how do we stabilize this so that we are protecting consumers.
Does California offer incentives for electric vehicles now that the federal tax credits have expired?
That's right. So there's about $200 million in the governor's budget for electric vehicle incentive, which I think comes out in another month or two, and that will provide a cash rebate when you buy an electric car to reduce the upfront cost.
But only below a certain income level, right?
Actually, I think they've done away with cap. And then in addition to that, there still is through the end of June, a tax credit for EV charging. And so that's something that's really important. If you think you're going to get an EV, buy the charger now and take advantage of that tax credit. But after that, unfortunately, Trump has canceled all those. And the EV tax credit, canceled last September.
Yeah. Not having to go to a gas station is a great feeling. And I know people are going to say electric cars are more expensive, but that's not really true anymore. And when you count in that the operating costs are much less for electric cars, they take almost no maintenance, which is why the dealers don't like them, because they make a lot of money on maintenance. The fuel, the electricity costs far less than gasoline. Over their lifetime, they're a much better investment. I charge mine with my solar panels, so I get free power, which can never go up in price.
That is right.
And, thank goodness that we're going to have cars that don't heat the planet, don't cause wildfires, and don't give your kids asthma.
I think one big opportunity is with the secondary market of used EVs. I just bought my wife and I just bought our daughter an electric car for Christmas. She's a college student down in LA. And, there are really good electric cars, Chevy Bolts, on the market for 10, 11, 12, 13, $14,000 that have 250-mile range.
Yeah.
And, the wear and tear on an EV is very different.
Yeah.
Because you don't have spark plugs and oil changes and transmission.
Yeah, there's all this machine.
So I've been driving an electric car, I think 8.5 years at this point, hard. I have over 100,000 miles in my car. I drive a Chevy Bolt. The only servicing I've had to do the car is get new tires.
That's me too.
That's it. So, the life cycle, I think, is longer for these cars, and there's just many fewer components to break. So a typical internal combustion engine vehicle has 250 moving parts, and electric car, it's 7. So there's just fewer things to break.
Yeah, for sure. It's very exciting, David. California is really leading the way, and we really have to hurry up. We really don't have that much time, according to the scientists, to go to clean, non-polluting energy. And that's why it's so frustrating to me to see this so-called climate hushing in the media. It's the new climate denial. Even the New York Times says we should be moderate and support candidates who want more fossil fuel drilling. I'd like to know what's moderate about destroying the economy and ruining the weather and collapsing insurance markets and flooding our coastal cities. How is that moderate? These people should catch up with the science. It's really outrageous. I don't think anyone should support ruining the economy, especially when, as we're hearing from David, there's so much innovation taking place. We're making so much progress. We really can solve this if we get the dinosaur industries and their corrupt politicians out of the way. So thank you, David, for showing us all this exciting progress today.
Good to be on the Fenton Forecast.
Thank you so very much. And I'm happy to forward any messages to David. Just please write to us at hello@fentonforecast.com. hello@fentonforecast.com. David, thank you so much for all you're doing.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Okay, so long.